She was my friend's mom, graceful, confident, and far beyond my reach. But the night she laughed and said, "You're cute when you pretend to be brave," something changed. I wasn't just the boy she used to smile at. I was the man she suddenly saw differently. It started on one of those ordinary evenings that never hint at how easily they'll stay in your memory. I had dropped by my friend Daniel's house after work, still in my wrinkled shirt and half tired from the day. We were supposed to watch a match, eat something, and waste a few hours doing nothing important. But when I stepped into their living room, she was there, Elena, his mom. I'd seen her before, of course, countless times. She'd always been kind, polite, a quiet background to our college chaos. But that evening, something felt different. Maybe it was how the fading sunlight softened her face, or how the faint scent of vanilla and something floral followed her as she moved between the kitchen and the hallway. She looked relaxed, sleeves rolled up, hair gathered loosely at the nape of her neck, bare feet making soft sounds on the wooden floor. There was a calmness about her that made everything else in the house feel quieter. "Hey, you," she said, smiling as she handed me a plate. "You're earlier than usual." I shrugged. Traffic was on my side today. She chuckled softly. "That's a first." Her tone was light, teasing, but it did something strange to me, a little spark I tried to ignore. She went back to arranging snacks on the counter while humming under her breath. I found myself watching her hands move, graceful, steady, like every motion carried meaning. Daniel called out from upstairs, saying he'd be down in a minute. So, for a while, it was just her and me in that quiet kitchen. I decided to help, mostly to keep from staring too long. "You don't have to," she said, glancing at me. "I know," I replied, reaching for the glasses anyway. "But I'd rather look useful than just stand here awkwardly." She laughed, a warm, low sound that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside her. "You're cute when you pretend to be brave." I froze for half a heartbeat. The words were light, almost playful, but her eyes lingered on me just long enough to blur the line between teasing and something else. I smiled back, unsure, pretending not to care, but my pulse betrayed me. When Daniel finally came downstairs, everything returned to normal. The room filled with noise again, his laughter, the TV, the clinking of plates. But every now and then, I'd catch her glance, soft, unreadable, and look away too quickly. Later that night, after I got home, I couldn't shake that one line from my mind. "You're cute when you pretend to be brave." It echoed differently each time I replayed it. Was she joking? Probably. But something about her tone, it wasn't mocking. It felt like she'd seen through me, through the nervous, polite young man trying too hard to appear composed. And maybe that's why it stayed with me. Because for the first time, it felt like she really saw me, not as her son's friend, not as some kid who dropped by too often, but as someone worth noticing. I didn't know it yet, but that single laugh, that single glance, had already changed the way I'd look at her forever. A few days passed, and I tried to convince myself that evening had meant nothing. She was just being kind, maybe playful. Older women could say things like that without meaning anything deeper, right? But when I saw her again, it was harder to pretend. It was one of those gray afternoons when rain makes everything slow. I had stopped by Daniel's place to return a borrowed book, only to find he wasn't home. Elena opened the door, holding a mug of coffee, her sweater sleeves pulled over her hands. "Daniel's not here, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice half drowned by the sound of rain hitting the porch roof. "He ran to the store. You can wait if you want." I nodded, stepping inside. The house smelled like rain, brewed coffee, and that faint vanilla note that always seemed to follow her. She motioned toward the kitchen. "Want something warm? You look like you walked through a storm." I laughed. "It's not that bad." Her eyes drifted toward the window. The brave face again. That teasing tone. It made my chest tighten before I could stop it. She poured me coffee, sitting across from me at the table. Outside, the rain tapped rhythmically against the glass. For a while, we just listened, the kind of silence that feels alive, not empty. Then she asked about my work, my plans, my family. It wasn't small talk, she really listened. Every time she looked at me, I felt like I owed her an honest answer. So I told her more than I meant to, that I wasn't sure about my future, that sometimes I felt stuck between who I was and who I wanted to be. Her expression softened, her eyes thoughtful. "You'll figure it out. You have that look, like you care too much to settle for less." Her words carried a quiet confidence that made me believe her, if only for a moment. When Daniel finally texted that he'd be late, she offered to drop me home. I tried to refuse, said it wasn't necessary, but she tilted her head and smiled. "Let me. It's raining harder now." No arguments. Inside her car, the world felt smaller, softer. The windshield wipers swayed back and forth, and the scent of her perfume filled the air, something clean and warm. We talked again, but it was different now. She told me about her younger days, how she used to paint but hadn't picked up a brush in years. Her voice was calm but distant, like she was watching her memories from far away. When we reached my street, the rain was still falling. I turned to thank her, and she reached out instinctively, brushing away a raindrop from my cheek with her thumb. "See," she said with that quiet smile. Still pretending to be brave. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The touch was gentle, not flirtatious, not bold, just human, yet it set something deep inside me alight. I wanted to say something, anything, but words wouldn't come. So I just smiled and whispered, "Thanks, for the ride." She nodded, her expression unreadable now. "Anytime." As I stepped out into the rain, I realized my heart was racing faster than it should. I told myself it was nothing, just a kind woman being kind. But part of me already knew, something between us had quietly begun. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had almost convinced myself that the moment in the car hadn't meant anything. Almost. But when Daniel invited me over for a small barbecue at his place, I hesitated longer than usual before saying yes. I told myself it was just a friendly get-together, good food, easy laughter, nothing complicated. Still, as I stood outside their house with a bag of ice in my hand, my heartbeat had that same uneven rhythm it did every time I saw her. The backyard was already alive with sound, music playing from a speaker, Daniel flipping burgers, a few of his neighbors chatting near the fence. And then, like she always did, Elena appeared, carrying a bowl of salad and sunlight in her smile. "Hey, stranger," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You decided to grace us with your presence." "Wouldn't miss it," I managed to say, though my voice felt rougher than I meant it to. She laughed, that same soft, knowing laugh that always disarmed me. "Good. We needed someone brave enough to deal with Daniel's cooking." I smiled, pretending to focus on the grill, but I could feel her watching me, not constantly, but just enough that I noticed. Every time our eyes met, it felt like the air between us shifted. When she handed me a drink later, our fingers brushed, just lightly, but the contact lingered. Neither of us moved away right away. It was nothing visible, nothing anyone else would catch. But I felt it, that quiet spark, that pulse of awareness that said this wasn't all in my head. The afternoon went on in a blur of chatter and heat. Daniel joked, the music got louder, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. But I kept finding her in the crowd without even trying. A glance over my shoulder, a flash of her hair in the sunlight, her voice weaving through laughter, she was always there, somewhere close enough to feel. Later, when everyone had gone inside to grab dessert, I stayed back to help her clean the table. It was quiet again, just the hum of the evening and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. "Thanks for helping," she said, stacking plates. "No problem," I said, picking up a glass beside her. "You've done enough." She turned toward me, her hand brushing mine as she reached for a napkin. Her touch lingered, maybe by accident, maybe not. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she smiled faintly, her voice soft but steady. You really don't have to try so hard all the time. I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? Her eyes held mine for a long, quiet second, warm, searching. You keep acting like you have to prove something. You don't. I tried to laugh it off, but something about the way she looked at me made it impossible. There was no teasing this time, no playfulness. Just truth, gentle, unsettling truth. I wanted to ask her what she saw when she looked at me like that, but Daniel called out from the kitchen, breaking the moment. She stepped back, her composure returning as she picked up the last plate. Go eat, she said with a smile. Before he finishes everything. I nodded, but as I walked inside, I glanced back once, just once, and found her already watching me. That glance, silent and unbroken, lasted longer than it should have. Long enough to feel like a promise neither of us dared to speak aloud. The next few days passed in the kind of quiet that follows a song you can't stop hearing in your head. Every small thing reminded me of her laugh, the way it rose and softened at the edges, and that look she'd given me by the table. That Friday night I dropped by Daniel's again. The house felt unusually still, the music, the chatter, all missing. Daniel was out with friends, his text saying he'd be late. I almost left, but then I heard faint movement out back, the sliding door creaking open to the patio. Elena was sitting there alone, barefoot, her phone face down beside her. A single porch light painted the scene in honey gold. There was a glass of red wine on the table and a kind of heaviness around her that didn't match the summer air. When she noticed me, she managed a small smile. Hey. You're early, or maybe I'm just here too late. I hesitated in the doorway. I can go if you want quiet. No, she said quickly, almost too quickly. Stay. It's fine. I could use company that doesn't argue. I stepped outside, the boards cool beneath my shoes. The night smelled of grass and rain left over from the afternoon. I sat beside her, careful to keep a polite distance. She sighed, tracing her finger around the rim of her glass. You ever have one of those days when you feel like you're holding the world together with thread? I nodded, unsure if she really wanted an answer. I had an argument with Mark, she continued, her ex-husband. He thinks I should have remarried by now. Like there's an expiration date for being alone. She laughed once, bitterly. Maybe he's right. Her voice cracked just enough to make me forget my usual awkwardness. You don't owe anyone a timeline, I said. Especially not someone who already left. She turned toward me, her eyes glimmering in the low light. That's a kind thing to say. I meant it. Silence filled the space again, not heavy but fragile. The crickets sang somewhere beyond the fence. Then she said, almost to herself, it's strange, being strong all the time. People see confidence and assume you don't get tired. Without thinking, I reached out and rested my hand on the table near hers, close, not touching. You don't always have to be strong, I said quietly. Not tonight. She looked at me for a long second, then smiled, soft, weary, grateful. You talk like someone twice your age. Or maybe you just look at me like I'm older than I am. That made her laugh, really laugh, and for a moment the sadness broke. She shook her head, tucking her hair behind her ear. You're still pretending to be brave, you know that. Maybe, I said, my heart pounding, but it seems to work sometimes. Her eyes softened. She didn't answer right away, and she didn't need to. The quiet between us said enough. When Daniel's car eventually pulled into the driveway, she stood up, brushing invisible dust from her jeans. Thank you, for listening. I nodded. Anytime. As she walked inside, she glanced back once, her expression unreadable under the porch light. That night, lying awake, I realized I hadn't imagined the connection between us. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something tender that neither of us knew what to do with. It was the kind of evening that never starts out special, quiet, overcast, too ordinary to suspect it might stay in your memory forever. Daniel had gone away for the weekend, and I'd come by to return his camera, not expecting anyone to be home. But as soon as I knocked, I heard her voice through the door, calm, familiar, and somehow softer than usual. "Elena," I said, trying to sound casual when she opened the door. "Didn't think you'd be home." She smiled faintly, stepping aside. "Well, surprise. Come in before the storm decides to get dramatic." The house was dim, lit by the dull glow of a cloudy sky. She wore a light sweater, sleeves half pushed up, and her hair hung loose for once. Something about her looked different, less polished, more real. We talked in the living room, easy and unplanned. She told me about a trip she wanted to take someday, and I teased her that someday wasn't a real date. She laughed, nudged my shoulder lightly, and rolled her eyes. Then the lights flickered once. Twice. And went out. The silence that followed was absolute. She sighed, shaking her head. "Perfect timing." I chuckled. "Don't worry, I'm brave, remember?" She laughed quietly in the dark. "That's what I'm afraid of." I found the candle she kept by the kitchen window and lit it, the small flame throwing golden light over her face. The room shrank to a circle of warmth, shadows stretching softly behind her. "Better," I said, setting it down on the coffee table. She smiled, eyes catching the light. "You're handy. I like that." We sat close, almost touching but not quite. Outside, the wind picked up, rain hitting the windows in uneven bursts. Inside, the quiet grew deeper. At first, we talked just to fill it, about books, her son, my plans after summer. Then, as thunder rolled somewhere far off, the words turned slower, quieter. "You know," she said after a pause, "you remind me of someone I used to know. You have that same way of pretending you're fine even when you're not." I smiled faintly. Maybe we both just got good at pretending. Her gaze lingered on me. Maybe. Another rumble of thunder made her flinch slightly. Without thinking, I laughed softly. "Don't tell me the brave one's afraid of storms." She gave me a look, half amusement, half warning. "Don't tease me." I smiled. "You're cute when you pretend to be brave." The line hung in the air between us, and the moment shifted, something invisible and delicate turning solid, real. Her eyes softened, surprised but not offended. The candlelight flickered, catching the small tremor in her breath. For a long second, neither of us spoke. I wanted to tell her everything, how her voice stayed in my head, how her laugh made the world feel smaller and safer. But I couldn't. Not yet. So I just sat there, looking at her, feeling everything I couldn't say pressing behind my ribs. She finally smiled, the kind that hides more than it reveals. "You should probably go before the rain gets worse." I nodded, but didn't move right away. My chest felt full, tight with words that wouldn't come out. When I finally stood, she rose too. For a heartbeat, we were close enough that the candlelight trembled between us. I think she felt it too, the pull neither of us had named. As I opened the door, she said softly, almost to herself, "You really are brave sometimes." And I left before I could say what I wanted to say most, "Only when you're looking at me." The morning after the storm, everything felt unnervingly calm, the kind of stillness that comes after something's shifted, even if no one says it out loud. I hadn't planned on seeing her that day. But Daniel had texted, asking me to drop by and pick something up from his mom since he wouldn't be home until later. I told myself it was just an errand. Still, the entire drive there, I could feel that moment from the night before replaying in my head, the look in her eyes when I teased her, the silence that followed, the closeness neither of us stepped away from. When she opened the door, sunlight was spilling through the windows behind her. The house looked the same, neat, calm, ordinary, but she didn't. Or maybe I was just seeing her differently. "Morning," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered for a moment before settling on mine. "You made it through the storm, I see." "Barely," I joked. "You okay? Power back?" She nodded. "Came on around dawn. Coffee?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." The kitchen felt strangely small that morning. The light was soft and warm, cutting through the thin curtains and catching little specks of dust in the air. She moved quietly, almost too quietly, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, sliding one toward me. For a while, we just stood there, sipping and pretending it was an ordinary morning. But the silence kept stretching between us like something alive. Finally, she broke it. "About last night," my chest tightened. I tried to keep my tone calm. "Yeah." She set her mug down gently. "It's not that we did anything wrong, but," she paused, searching for words. "We should be careful. People might misunderstand." "I know," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to," she shook her head, cutting me off, though not unkindly. "You didn't do anything. That's not the point." There was a quiet sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A kind of distance, like she was building a wall out of kindness instead of stone. "You're young," she said softly. "You should be out there, living, finding people your age, not sitting here keeping me company." I forced a smile. "You make it sound like I'm wasting my time." She looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "You're not. But I can't be where your story begins. That wouldn't be fair to either of us." I wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't about age, or timing, or what anyone thought. It was about this quiet, strange understanding that didn't need words. Instead, I just said, "I don't think connection cares how old it is." She looked up at that, and for a second, something in her expression faltered, warmth breaking through restraint. Then she reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. Her touch was gentle, grounding, heartbreakingly brief. "I wish it were that simple," she whispered. Her thumb brushed my knuckles once before she pulled away, her eyes glistening faintly in the morning light. And just like that, I understood. This wasn't rejection. It was protection, for both of us. The rest of the coffee went cold as we sat there, saying nothing, pretending that distance could undo the closeness we'd already shared. When I left, she stood by the window, arms folded, watching the street. I didn't look back, but I could feel her gaze following me until I turned the corner. The world outside was bright again, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel brave at all. 2 weeks passed before I saw her again. Long enough for life to start pretending it was normal, yet not long enough for my thoughts to stop circling back to her voice, her laugh, that look in her eyes when she said, "I wish it were that simple." Daniel had finally returned home from his trip, full of stories, completely unaware of the silent storm that had lived between his mom and me. I laughed where I was supposed to, nodded when he talked, but every sound in that house echoed with memory. That day, I went to drop off his old guitar, something he wanted his mom to sell online. I told myself I'd leave it at the porch, ring the bell, and go. Quick, simple, painless. But when she opened the door, all my plans unraveled. She stood there in a soft cream sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, eyes calm but a little tired, the way people look when they've been thinking too much. "Hey," she said quietly. "I didn't think you'd come by yourself." "Just returning Daniel's guitar," I replied, holding it up like a shield. "Come in for a second?" she asked, her voice polite but uncertain. "I made tea." I hesitated, the way people do when they know a moment might hurt but they still want to feel it. Then I nodded. Inside, everything looked the same, but it felt different. Maybe because I knew this would be the last time. We sat at the same kitchen table. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore, it was heavy, full of things we'd both chosen not to say. She looked down at her cup, then said softly, I've been thinking about what you said, that connection doesn't care about age. I leaned back slightly, heart thudding. And? Her eyes met mine, steady and kind. You were right. It doesn't. But people do. And I've lived long enough to know what that kind of talk becomes once it leaves the safety of these walls. She smiled faintly, not the teasing smile from before, but one that carried warmth and regret all at once. You're good, you know that. You notice things. You make people feel seen. Don't lose that. Her voice trembled, just a little, before she added, but don't let it tie you to someone who can't give it back the same way. I wanted to speak, to say I didn't care, that what we had wasn't about giving back. But she reached out, her fingers brushing mine, just enough to quiet me. I'll always remember that night, she whispered. When you stood there, trying to look brave. I shouldn't have laughed, but you were cute. And so young. Her laugh this time was soft, like it hurt to let it out. I couldn't help it, I smiled too. Guess I'll just have to grow into that bravery. You already have, she said, her eyes glistening. You just don't know it yet. For a few seconds, we stayed like that, two people caught between what was right and what was real. Then she stood, giving me one last look that said everything words couldn't. Goodbye, sweetheart. I nodded, swallowing the ache in my throat. Goodbye. When I stepped outside, the air was cool, the sun starting to dip. Behind me, her door closed softly, not in anger, not in sadness, but with a quiet kind of peace. And though I never saw her again, that laugh, that warmth, that one impossible connection, it stayed with me. Because some goodbyes don't end stories. They just teach you how to carry them. If this story touched something quiet in you, hit that red heart, leave a comment about the moment that stayed with you most, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories where love grows slowly, not loudly.